Welcome to Thinking Through the Darkness, a Lore by Spec podcast with me, your host, Spec. This is a podcast where we talk through all of the pre-production that goes into making the theories that you see on the Lore by Spec channel and its associated channels. Let's get the shilling out of the way first. If you haven't gone and subscribed and liked and commented on the videos on Lore by Spec on the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that now. That's one of the best ways that you can support me. This podcast is also available anywhere that you can find podcasts. So if you are listening, if you could like the podcast and maybe leave a little review, that does wonders for the algorithm on the podcast side, which really helps. And if you want to help support this podcast, this is the only one that currently doesn't use free tools. And since it's a paid thing, if you have the means to contribute to this, the link for this is in my description for my Ko-Fi. This helps me keep the light on and pay for all of the things that go into making this podcast a quality project. So I'm going to preface this podcast with, I'm not addressing the person specifically, I'm addressing the notion of the thought that went with this particular comment. Because today we're going to be talking about canon in Kingdom Hearts and canon in general. We're going to be talking about what is canon, what isn't canon, and where I come from in terms of a research background and talking about the importance of not just media literacy, but the importance of sitting with things that are uncomfortable, that you might not agree with. So while this podcast, I'm aware, is going to be coming out a few weeks later than the comment I'm referring to, it came from the Kairi video that I had produced, where I put together this notion that Kairi is by definition undefined because she inhabits so many roles at various different points, and it all relates to the sleeping realms theory that the gang over there put together and that I've been talking through. But I got a question from Tyler Cafe 1260 that says, but the issue is that this is only a problem if you adhere to the mobile games canon. Most fans nowadays, even on streaming platforms, are evolving how they approach the series. Nowadays, most people willingly wait to watch UX cutscenes after 3, and that's only seen as a bonus. Like, really think about how crazy this divides the fan base. If you strictly follow the available games to understand the story, the Melody of Memories isn't breaking any rules. If you do include the unavailable games, like US and Dark Road, then that starts to contradict. However, the real question then becomes, which game is the contradiction? Is the available Melody of Memories the contradiction, or is the unavailability of UX and Dark Road the contradiction? I hope you understand this perspective. And what I've said in reply, which I wanted to take time and elaborate on here, is I said, I completely understand the perspective. However, I would be inclined to think that they're all part canon, considering there's mentions and references to parts in other media, the compendiums, character files, the ultimaniums, etc. As I've mentioned before, some bits are retconned in the character files for some characters. Sadly, I feel they're at a bit of an impasse when it comes to it because not everyone will have played the mobile games. What we have are people's playthroughs at best, and that's even if you got the official localizations. Most people aren't going to do the work or think to check if this is a fan translation or if it's official. There's too many moving parts for a casual fan, which makes it scrolling, which makes it inaccessible. That's the honest truth. You can't expect people who are just casual fans to be wading in this deeply. It's unreasonable. I don't think, however, on the flip side, that you can consider the mobile games not canon. It's easier to consider them not canon, but then do we extend the same rhetoric for Chain of Memories because it's card-based, or Birth by Sleep because it was exclusive to PSP for years. Personally, I'd say no, and it could be an argument that could be made. After all, there is a Kingdom Hearts game on the Siemens phone or Samsung phone from way back when that is absolutely lost media that no one would consider to think of for mining. Do we consider the implication or games that were unreleased or cancelled as being canon? Because there's been a few. It's a wider argument. For me, everything is canon. It's the best way that I can address it and then move forward to a point out where things are or not aligning. That's where the line is with me. So like I said, I want to address the argument and not the person here. The logic for me of excluding the games because they're unavailable doesn't really hold up for me, because from a research perspective, we're in a very interesting quandary with it. Like, ultimately, the TLDR of this argument breaks down into this is not a fan issue, this is a systemic issue within Square about how they handle their properties, their lore, their conservation of their media. Because essentially what they have done by archiving Union Cross and Dark Road is essentially put them in the bucket of lost media. Tyler's argument of, modern players have adapted where they only see it as bonus content, then the argument of them going in depth in this doesn't affect them anyway. That would be my first critique of this. If you're only ever looking at the content of Kingdom Hearts 3, post Kingdom Hearts 3, and the cutscenes therein as a nice to have, then you're kind of conflating an accessibility point with your entry point into this series. Right? And I think they are two fundamentally very different things, because we would all have a unique entry point into the series. Some of us did start with 1, a lot of us started with 2. I'm sure that there's other people who started at various other entry points into the series. I don't necessarily think that correlation is causation here. I'm also not inclined to think that because it's uncomfortable that there is no clean answer between what is or what is not canon means that we should remove a branch from the tree, because it's still important to the tree as a whole, right? It comes down to whether or not you see the games as being primary or secondary sources. And for me, the games will always be considered a primary source. What we've now got thrown into the mix is the accessibility of those sources. For example, does a book stop becoming a valuable source of literature just because it's out of print? If you go into a library, is that different than buying a book from a bookstore? Does that suddenly negate the value of the book? I don't think so. Right? A similar argument is implied here of, oh, well, we don't have ready access to it and it doesn't fit in nicely, therefore we should cull it. And I've got issues with that in terms of we lose so much by not being able to sit with things that don't line up easily. I've mentioned FNAF quite a bit because I like FNAF as a franchise. I like how it tells its stories, even if it's convoluted. But currently, FNAF has 2 different branches. It has the games and it has the books. And while they're in the same universe, they're not in the same timeline, right? So events don't necessarily overlap between the two, but they all exist in the same world, and one informs the other. It's why I've been so keen to talk about and think about how we could approach the games as different branches of timelines. Of probably what video will be up is my 3 timelines hypothesis, because we break them down based on their titles. We talk about different prefixes, like the or-e prefix, the final mix, and the or-es, the mind, and the final mix tags, because not all of them share the same root. And if we go through the compendium and some of the deeper works, there is a note that says that these works are derivative, and derivative does the heavy lifting here, right? Derivative means separated from the base, coming from a source, right? Distinct but different. And we need to be able to sit with the logic that this doesn't make sense, but it might further down the line. And maybe it's not worth discrediting that because it simply doesn't line up at the minute. Tyler mentioned something that, in more modern understandings or interpretations, most fans nowadays, even on streaming platforms, are evolving how they approach the series. So that is also very much them argument, right? Most fans. My feelings with that is you can't possibly know that because you haven't done a study. You have seen a subset of vocal fans in a forum or talking about a specific element of things. Unless you have some definitive proof. This is the only place where I would properly push back, is that we get into a lot of assuming the majority perspective on things without actually having any proof of it, right? Most people are willingly wait to watch Union X after 3 and only see it as about, do you have any proof of that? And I don't mean that to be harsh or derogative. I mean that as in, cool, where's your sources to support that? Because what might make sense for you might not make sense to anybody else. And plus, for those specific people, this doesn't really apply anyway, right? Because they are specifically looking at this and having a certain interpretation of that it is just a bonus, that we don't have to think about it, in any other capacity, which is perfectly valid and perfectly fine, right? But that doesn't negate or discount or discredit the work that I'm doing here, that the Sleeping Realm theory people are doing over there, and everybody else who want to connect the dots in a different way that isn't by proxy the majority. As I mentioned in the comment, there is no way you can expect kind of the standard Kingdom Hearts fan to know the contradictions that lie in the character files, for example, about Ven, where we have the Union Cross thing of it very much being clear that Ven murders Strelitzia, and in the character files, it doesn't mention it at all. And even goes so far as to retcon Strelitzia's entry into it being like, yeah, something happened and she vanished. It negates Ven's part altogether in it, right? And if we lose people who are doing that work, who don't track those inconsistencies, who then go, okay, well, this was the point in where there was clearly a creative pivot. Because there was clearly a creative pivot between when the script for Union Cross was developed and when the character files got published. There was a retcon, a decision being made in between those 2 points where a pivot was changed. as people who are interested in this as theory crafting, as lore, as, research and literature and mining these things, those would be the elements that we're interested in. For normal fans, I'm pretty sure if I was just like, oh yeah, well, that was retconned, most people would just nod at me and go, oh, okay, cool, didn't realize that. How come? And then I'd be like, I don't know, but there was a point between when Union Cross was created and when the character files was released, where there was a significant change in direction between some people's characters. And most people's response to that would be like, oh, cool, I didn't know that. And it wouldn't change their enjoyment, their how it impacts them in terms of what they understand of the series. It doesn't affect their enjoyment of it. But it's really important that we have the ability to not let corporations skew our view as to what we have been told previously, right? Because if we lose the ability to be able to track discrepancies and look at things through a critical lens, then we will end up at a position further on in life where we aren't able to sit with anything that we're being told in a manner that could cause us to be like, hang on a second, that goes against what I know and what I've been told. And that's such an important critical skill to have, to be able to look at discrepancies and be like, hey, this wasn't what we were previously told, this isn't what we previously know, and not essentially be gaslit by corporations to be like, no, this was always this way. And if we don't push back on that and sit with the concept of this being deliberately uncomfortable, that it doesn't make sense, right? Then we'll never develop that muscle. And it's so important, not just in Kingdom Hearts, in everything else, that we develop that level of media literacy, that we can evolve our thinking to understand discrepancies when we see them. And more often than not, especially in this franchise, these changes are not malicious. These changes are not a gotcha. But this is a very safe training ground for us when it comes to training our media literacy, training our ability to reason and rationalize and conceptualize things differently. Let me put it to you this way. When I started this channel 9 months ago, and we're nearly at the 100,000 view marks, which is wild in 9 months when you consider that this is a very niche, often Kingdom Hearts based channel, that the first theory I ever did on this channel was about how I thought Kingdom Hearts 3 is ultimately not going to end up being canon. Because there's too much about Kingdom Hearts 3 that's just weird in comparison to the rest of the series. If you haven't watched it, scroll all the way back. It's one of the first ones, and I'm very proud of it. But it talks about how it's weird we're not at a station of awakening. We're not picking powers, we're choosing memories. We're asked if this is who we are, if our memories make up who we are, rather than we are given a power and then set loose to see what we become. We are choosing specific links that ultimately end up with us becoming in this curated version of Sora based on his memories. Sora is also vacant for that entire process. He is stoic. He doesn't have any sort of glint in his eye. It's weird that we moved through a mirror from the Kingdom Hearts 1 version of Sora into Kingdom Hearts 2. That's not something we're ever really talking about. We're also closer to a final world than we are the Station of Awakening. And we know that the final world is closer to death than it is awakeness in terms of Kingdom Hearts. But we fight a Darksider that's clear in the final world. One that ends up suspiciously looking a lot like Kairi by the time you get your remind. There's so much in Kingdom Hearts 3 that from the jump doesn't make sense to me. Even the intro of Kingdom Hearts 3 tells you a lot because it is Ericus and Xehanort playing their chess game where the events of Kingdom Hearts are playing out. Things that we have seen and experienced before. There's a lot of imagery of life being shone on people and things that we've previously haven't interacted with for a while, except for Riku. Riku walks through that, beam of light to be revealed from the darkness when he's already been in play for a while. He hasn't been in the shadows for a long time. So it's weird that as iconography, it's more like chess pieces being taken out of a box than it is anything we actually have any agency in. And a lot of those scenes play out on a chessboard. It's not actual events. These are things all staged by Ericus and Xehanort's very active imagination. I go on to talk about in that theory how this is reflective in worlds that are more abstract. For example, Monsters, Inc., Toy Box are all devoid of any sort of people or things or activities. For Toy Box, there is literally nobody there. It's just the toys. There's nobody in Galaxy Toys. There's nobody around. It's frozen. It's stoic in many ways. The same with Monsters, Inc. It's a factory. But there's nobody there. It's just Sully, Mike, Boo, and Randall with the occasional worker putting out a fire. But there's nobody there. And the only rationale that I can put behind that is that the boys themselves have no concept as to what that looks like. They know the pieces, they know the adjacent moves, but they've got no understanding as to how it all really works in those individual worlds. Because they've never been there. But yet you look at Arendelle, you look at Corona, you look at San Fernocchio, places that they would have experienced facsimiles of in their own experiences training as Keyblade wielders. They would have known cities, they would have known hubs, they would have known what these places would look like and feel like because they've experienced it. It also explains the lot of ex machinas that happen within the end at the Keyblade graveyard. Like, while I am not against the fan service of Ephemer coming in to save the day, right? For people who have no understanding of Union Cross or Dark Road or anything like that, that blindsides people, but it's also very imagination-y based gotcha from two kids. Because you can't imagine in an actual battle scenario that something like that would actually work out. Right? It's so fantastical and so outstretching from the grasps of war that it can only really have happened or occurred in the mind of a child. And it was one of my most popular theories for a reason, because it was so abstract. A lot of people thought I was just bananas, right? But my whole point of creating these theories and putting in so much time and effort and rationale and trying to make sure that the pieces align and that I can tell this story in a way that makes people think. I've never once at any stage, at any point in my theories, have been like, this is the definitive proof. This has always been a case of, here's a perspective that I don't think people have thought of yet, or here is a different way of doing it. And if we perpetually go on this notion of, oh, well, everybody has X take, then we leave no space for Y or Z or anything else that could come in that could ultimately change the landscape of what we know and how we interact and engage with something that we all love. I personally really appreciate everything that the Sleeping Realm folks have done. Like, going through their body of work, it is so detailed, it is so well rationalized, it is so well thought out. It's truly, like, it's so impressive, and I admire them so much. And I don't agree. And there's space for both, right? Because just as much as they can explain and rationalize their own thought process on Sleeping Realms, the same way I can go, yeah, but I also have my take. Labeling this as most fans are evolving how they have approached, and that it's only seen as a bonus, negates the ability to have this conversation in a way that is truly how it's intentioned, which is to get people's brains churning, to challenge what they think that they know. And I am never somebody who, well, I do believe in Occam's razor that often the simplest answers is the correct one. I do think that we lose so much in our ability to, when we don't challenge what we do know, to try and expand on it. So I will never be that content creator that's like, oh, well, this is what the majority think, and therefore that's correct. Because what if the majority are wrong? What if the majority are just kind of going along with it and have never thought about it in another way? We lose so much by expressing those perspectives and making people sit there to be like, hey, this is an alternative perspective and it's worth holding space for, because that is the whole exercise of this. It's to become better thinkers, better growers, better to engage with things, to better ourselves, to help each other, to create new perspectives and new ideas. And that's ultimately what this has always been about for me. To encourage, support, and facilitate that learning and engagement in a way that benefits all of us. This has been Thinking Through the Darkness, a Lore by Spec production with me, Spec. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me today. Just as a reminder, don't forget, if you haven't followed the Lore by Spec YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe. It's free there. If you haven't taken the time to review the podcast or dropped a like and a comment, those really help too. And if you ever feel inclined to help me keep the lights on over here, head to Ko-Fi, which is in my description, to help support the podcast. Once again, thank you all so very much for listening, and I will see you all next time.